3 months ago, I started this garden with just 4 plants. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if I could keep them alive. Now, this is what it looks like. Even before we moved onto this property, I always dreamed about having a garden someday. I wanted to grow my own tomatoes for homemade sauce, canned pickles, and learn how to produce some of our own food. But even after moving here, it still took me another year before I finally got started. So I built a tiny garden beside my she shed with just 4 plants. I figured if I could get those to grow and not die, then maybe I could actually do this. But once those first plants started growing, something kind of clicked. And needless to say, I expanded. Within about a month, I had built 4 more garden beds, added fruit trees, berry bushes, and suddenly this little experiment started turning into a real garden. Things started moving pretty quickly at this point. The more I planted, the more I realized I needed a better watering system. So I built my first one, which ended up being a complete bust. The floor to heat warped and bent the plastic tubing, which changed the spray direction and water flow. Some plants were getting too much water while others were barely getting any at all. Some plants became stressed. Tomatoes started splitting, and I realized gardening was going to teach me a lot more than I expected. So eventually I scrapped that system and switched to a small solar-powered watering setup that felt way less overwhelming to manage. Once the watering system was dialed in, things became a little less stressful. At one point I remember thinking, this is way easier than I expected. And that's about the time the garden started teaching me even more lessons. Some leaves started discoloring. The squirrels discovered my tomatoes before I did. There were strange things growing in the garden beds, and odd creatures eating my plants. But after a while, everything finally started taking off. Flowers started appearing, pollination was happening, and vegetables were starting to form. That's when it finally started feeling like a real garden. The very last bed I planted was corn, and unlike the rest of the garden, I actually started that one from seed. I had never grown anything from seed before, but seeing those little sprouts come up out of the soil was one of the coolest parts of this whole experience. I've already made my first pot of homemade tomato sauce, and I've made 6 jars of refrigerator pickles. And honestly, that feels kind of surreal considering all this started with just 4 little plants. Everything's really thriving now. And now, I'm not afraid every time I see something looking off anymore. A few months ago, every yellow leaf, every strange spot felt like a disaster. But now I've learned that most garden problems are actually fixable, especially if you catch them early enough. 3 months ago, I had never grown anything in my life. And if you're hesitant about starting a garden yourself, I completely understand. But honestly, taking that first leap is the hardest part. Because you don't have to know everything when you start. You just have to start. I've learned so much already in just 3 months. And honestly, I feel like I'm only getting started. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next 3 months bring, and heading into the fall when I start my second garden.